Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships, and this time one of my own replays. This is the Galissonnière, the tier 6 French cruiser, and I've actually been playing this a bit more recently. I got it, when was the Bismarck campaign? That was what, late last year? I've had it a little while anyway, and this along with the Gerda are ones that I've finally decided to start playing with a bit, and it's not a bad ship. But in the case of the Galissonnière specifically, of course, you've also got the de Grasse at tier 6, which is pretty much just better. There's one or two areas where the Galissonnière is superior. I think it's got what is it, like slightly like a better turning radius in the water, and I think the AA is better if I remember correctly, but it's not hugely better. It's still not, you know, anything close to the Cleveland, which is of course the gold standard at tier 6 at the moment. But the other things that are better about the de Grasse are, you know, things that are quite important. So it's a little bit faster, and it has a faster reload, and it gets, you know, more torpedoes, and there's probably one or two other things as well. So it pretty much is just a straight upgrade. So this ship though, I mean, that's not to say that this ship is bad in any way. It's actually a pretty decent tier 6 cruiser, and this is not bad matchmaking for it. It's a tier 7 game, and it's also Epicentre, so I'm going to have to be a little bit careful. I can't really just be gung-ho and charge right into the middle, because I wouldn't last very long. I'm only a cruiser after all. And that's always the problem when you're in a cruiser, is you have to be careful and circumspect, and to some extent you just have to hope that people choose not to shoot at you. And I'm sure I could pick out plenty of examples of games where you know, I did get shot at and I went from full health to 10% health in a single salvo, which is never particularly fun. And this isn't going to be one of those games, because this is one of those games where I actually managed to do okay, but this is also one of those games where I managed not to get shot at too much, and that's just kind of luck more than anything else. You never know how it's going to go for any individual game. Now, of course, the trick of the French cruisers is they get the speed boost, so you can help yourself a little bit in that regard, but that's not going to be much use to me right now. I mean, this is an Epicentre game, so everything's much more focused towards the middle. Anyway, so the point where I'm going to get to use a speed boost is a point where I'm going to be travelling along one of the flanks, quite probably. And at the moment, well, my focus is on this flank. This is where most of my teammates are, and there's only a couple of enemies over here, so this is a good place for us to start. Although it does mean us kind of conceding control of the middle, but, you know, me in my lone cruiser, there's not much I can do about that as an individual. I just kind of have to go where my team is and hope I don't get shot at too much. Although at the moment there are two things firing at me, but an HE firing Bayern in the scheme of things isn't such a big threat, so actually I don't have to worry about them too much. So we've got a bit of slow movement going on. You know, there's not, like, the team as a whole isn't being particularly decisive in any one direction at the moment, and so this bio really is just the best thing to keep picking on. It's got decent HE shells, this thing. You don't have the downside of say the Nuremberg, where it's fast firing but the HE chance is not very good. So you do, like, you stick a Victor Lima flag on, you get demo expert on this captain, and you can do all right. And of course, as a 6-inch cruiser, IFHE is a perfectly viable skill as well, although I don't think I've got it on this captain. I think this is just like a 10-point captain at the moment. I'm probably going to keep this captain and this ship just so I've got an IFHE captain for the de Grasse. That of course is going to be not really an optimal captain setup for the Algerie once that's unlocked, so that'll probably be a new captain I start off with that thing. I could put Jack Dunkirk in the tier 7, but actually I think he's in the Lyon at the moment, so he's probably going to stick with the battleship line. So this Bayern's wandered into a really bad spot. Our Fiji, however, that's pushing towards him, I mean, he's healthy at the moment, but it's a Fiji, and he's not trying to smoke up to fire at this guy or anything, so he might lose a lot of health in the process, or even lose his ship. And the Bayern's not completely without backup. There's an Arizona lurking behind the island there. There's also a Queen Elizabeth a little further away to the north, and there's an Igler that looks like it's coming over on this side as well. We've actually got some ships now pushing more towards the east as well, but they don't, like, that's not personally what I'd be doing. And the Nelson especially isn't going to be able to make a quick getaway, and we've actually just lost one of our destroyers, the Hatsaharu, so yeah, that's pushing in against superior numbers. That's probably not the wise thing to do. I'm just trying to stick with teammates at the moment. You know, there's multiple cruisers around, and there's also the Queen Elizabeth here as well. So if we can basically pick off these isolated targets, and this is kind of, you know, I had in mind what happened in the recent tanks replay I did. You know, you pick off the isolated targets, you weaken the enemy team overall. You don't charge in against superior numbers and expect to come off well. Not in a cruiser anyway. You know, you might get away with it in certain limited circumstances in some battleships, but for the most part you are always seeking to have an unfair fight in your favour. So the Bayern is done, and I'm just doing the same thing that I did to him to the Arizona now, and now it's the Straws that's at the front taking the beating. The Fijis are back here with me. The Queen Elizabeths, you know, they could maybe be being a bit more active right now, but again, not the fastest of ship, although they're not slow, the Queen Elizabeths, exactly. It's what, 25 knots, or is that Nagato I'm thinking of? It's not far off 25. So yeah, they're not fast, but they're not slow, and certainly faster than the Arizona. So it would be nice if the two battleships we have here were being a little more active, but never mind. So I think we've lost the Nelson at this point. We've only got a T-22 over there now. The Scharnhorst is falling back towards this side. We've also got a Fuso, who's way down in J1, and our carrier has moved over to that flank as well. And keep an eye on what's going on the minimap there, because that's going to be important to the overall outcome of this game. And although it's not great positioning for our carrier moving towards the flank where all the enemy ships are, the enemy ships maybe might end up getting a little bit distracted by his presence, or at least some of them will anyway. So we're forcing these guys back. The Igler is, you know, trying to do Igler things, which personally I don't like that ship very much. It's effective under somewhat limited circumstances, and those circumstances involve your team winning and pushing forwards and being on the offensive. It doesn't seem to do very well as a defensive ship. It struggles with its somewhat limited torpedo range, and if you're just trying to fire and kite away, well, yeah, it's got a very, very good top speed when it's using its speed boost, but it's also only got so many hit points to work with. Even that, if that is quite a lot of hit points for a destroyer, they're only going to last so long. So, yeah, it's a limited resource, basically. So that Molotov, maybe I could have been firing some AP salvos, but I didn't want to switch when I knew I might be switching my fire back to the Arizona in short order. And I am just, like, deliberately sticking close to allies. I'm trying to make myself a less attractive target, and that's pretty much the best you can do. As I said, as I said at the start, like, it does somewhat come down to luck whether people decide to shoot at you or not, and you can do your best to make yourself not the best target to shoot at, but sometimes people will shoot at you anyway. Some people, or sometimes people will do the thing that seems irrational to you, even if you're trying to make it more rational for them to shoot at other things by, you know, hiding behind an island or sticking near an ally or doing lots of maneuvering. But in this case, it kind of paid off. I was being targeted at various points, but nobody's really shot at me that much, and I've been able to dodge the things that that you know, have been shooting at me. So it's not been too bad so far, and I'm actually very healthy still. But of course, in a cruiser, that really doesn't mean a lot because it can change very, very rapidly. You can go from lots of health to no health in the blink of an eye. So this group's pushed round the north flank. I've doubled my damage. I set a bunch of fires and got a bunch of health out of that Arizona. And now we can maybe do something about pushing back into the middle where there's this Queen Elizabeth who is fairly isolated. Note where their Duke of York is, by the way. They did take out our carrier, but now they have their top tier battleship utterly and totally out of position. Yes, that was somebody who just really, really wanted that carrier kill, and now they are not really in a good place to help their team, and that is incredibly useful for our team because that just means we've got one less ship to deal with, and it's a top tier battleship as well. So that's a big bonus. Our Queen Elizabeths are both actually still quite healthy, and the Scharnhorst is decently healthy also. So I mean, you know, in terms of map control, it maybe on the face of it doesn't look so good, but just the amount of hit points that our ships have left versus the positioning and the hit points of the enemy ships at this point, I think I fancy our chances at this stage. Even if their carrier was an exceptional player, they'd maybe struggle to turn this around. So the Queen Elizabeth's in trouble, the Molotov is down, we know where the Eigler is, and we know where the Duke of York is because they went herring off after a not particularly useful target. And they're, you know, quite healthy as well, so they could have potentially, they could have maybe made a difference. But as it is, the enemy team has kind of given this one away. And that's the point of this replay, I suppose, if there is one, that just looking at the mini-map is not the be-all and end-all of whether, you know, of the situation. I'm struggling with words here. It's not necessarily the whole picture. It's a very important part of the picture of which ships are where and what kind of control you have over capture circles. But you know, the health of the remaining ships and which ships are where exactly, and you know, a top tier ship having dashed off down to the south to get a carrier, and it all kind of adds up to a picture where actually, yeah, we didn't have at any point any of the cap circles, but it's really kind of not mattering because we've basically won. Although it's not been the easiest victory, we have lost most of our team, but we're just in a position now where it's pretty firmly in our favour. We'd have to try very, very hard to lose this. So there's a chance for a bit more damage here, and maybe if I'm lucky, even another kill, but there's very little chance I'd get like a Kraken out of this. It seems a bit unlikely. Our Fiji is not looking in a good way, but we'll see if we can kill this Ranger before they manage to kill the Fiji. And then at that point it will just leave the Eigler, whom we know isn't super high health, and this Duke of York, who just completely called it wrong. Oh, actually the Eiglers actually, they do have a decent amount of health left, so never mind. Although, you know, it's still a destroyer. Even an Eigler with a decent amount of hit points for a destroyer, it's still a destroyer, so I think we can take it. So we're basically in the end game at this point, although as it's going to turn out, that carrier does manage a kill from beyond the grave with their final orders to their planes. I wasn't quite sure at this point if the torp bombers had maybe been tagged onto a different player, but it looks like, in retrospect, that he had put them both on the Fiji just to try and get that last kill. But I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't want to complacently assume that they'd been meant for the Fiji and therefore just sail along in a straight line and eat a broadside full of torpedoes from a dead player, which would have been a little embarrassing. So instead I manoeuvred accordingly just to be on the safe side, pinged my defensive AA, and actually got some bonus air kills as a result. And with the defensive, the AA on this is not bad actually. It's not too bad at all, but it's not really a ship I'd go heavily on the AA skills with. I don't think it's worth having manual AA on this, although AFT maybe. So now that Igla's dead, I've just reached 100k damage, which feels not bad for a tier 6 ship in a tier 7 game, although there will be some decent component of that being fire damage, I'm sure, as we'll see on the end screen. And all that's left now is this Duke of York, who really did not help their team win. Now, I'm not going to like lay the whole thing on this single player. There are occasions when you can look at a single player and their actions in the late game and say, okay, they did this and they should have done this, and ergo they lost the game as a result. I don't think that's quite the case with this Duke of York player, but they certainly did not help their team by running off all the way down south after a target that was not that important at that point. So 115k damage and a Confederate. That's not too bad, and definitely my best game in this thing so far. And I've probably had better games in, say, the Cleveland, but that feels pretty decent for a tier 6 cruiser when I'm not top tier. But it wasn't bad matchmaking though. I don't mind tier 7 games in tier 6 ships. It's when you get tier 8 games consistently that things get a little unpleasant. So 1869 base XP, which was a decent amount ahead of everybody else, and as you can see, actually the majority of the damage I did was just from firing my guns, but 26k from fires is still not bad. That's still a nice little top up on top of everything else that I did. So yes, the Galissonnière, it's not a bad ship at all, but if I was just choosing between this and the de Grasse to play for fun at tier 6, I'm pretty sure I would always pick the de Grasse, because there's really no reason not to. And so, having said, I might keep this and have this captain in the de Grasse. Actually, I might just sell it and put the captain in the de Grasse, because come to think of it, there's not much reason to keep the Galissonnière if you've also got a de Grasse. So that about wraps it up for this video, and if you enjoyed it, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.